$10, going once. The auctioneer's voice barely filled the room. 9 people sat in the folding chairs at the Kettle Bend Village Hall that Tuesday morning. Most of them had come for the surplus filing cabinets and a snow plow with a cracked blade. The last line on the sheet was a building, the old police station. Condemned, sold as is, and where is, with no warranty of any kind. Going twice. Wyatt Renner was 18 years old. He had $19, a backpack with a broken zipper, and a printed slip that said he was allowed to bid. He had aged out of the foster system 6 days before, on a Wednesday. They handed him a folder with his name misspelled on the tab. Since he was 7, every caseworker who opened that folder had told him the same thing: no living relatives, both sides gone. He raised his hand. The auctioneer paused and looked at him the way men look at a stray that wanders in out of the cold. He asked for the record whether the young man understood the terms: no heat, no water, a roof the county engineer had condemned in writing. Wyatt said he understood. That was mostly true. He had slept 2 of the last 6 nights at the rest stop on Highway 8. A condemned roof was still a roof. Sold for $10 to the young man in the back. That was how Wyatt Renner came to own a police station. Nobody clapped. Nobody shook his hand. The others gathered their coats and went out into a gray wind. It carried the first real cold of the year. That cold came to that part of Wisconsin about 3 weeks before the men started talking about deer season. A man in a canvas coat told his wife, not quietly, that the boy had just bought himself a demolition bill. The county had the order half drawn already, he said. The place would come down by Thanksgiving. Wyatt heard all of it. He folded the deed slip into the inside pocket of his jacket. He squared its edge against the seam so it would lie flat. He said nothing. A long time ago he had learned that saying nothing cost the least. He had learned the rest of it young, too. Wanting things out loud was how you ended up explaining, later, why you never got them. So he had stopped wanting out loud. By 12 he could sit at a stranger's table and eat what was set in front of him and never once ask for more. The families always said the same 2 words about him to the caseworker: no trouble. As if a boy being no trouble were a thing he had done for them. Not a wall he had built with his own 2 hands. The last house had been the longest. 2 years in a town the next county over, with a couple who fostered for the check and never pretended otherwise. They were not cruel. Cruel would have been easier to push against. They were only absent in the particular way of people waiting for a thing to be over. On his 16th birthday, the woman set a grocery store cupcake by his plate with a single candle. Then she went back to her show in the other room. He ate it cold. He did not mind. By then he had a rule about birthdays, and the rule was to expect nothing, and the rule had never once failed him. He had seen the auction the way he saw most things, by accident and by reading. The surplus list was tacked to a corkboard at the county office where he went to sign his exit papers. Snowplow. Filing cabinets. 1 building, $10 minimum bid. He stood in front of that board a long time with a bus token in his fist. A shelter would put him out by 8 in the morning. A building would not put him out at all. He had ridden out to the county seat on the early bus with his face against the cold glass. The fields went by stripped and brown, the corn already down. The round bales stood wrapped in white plastic, scattered across the stubble like something spilled. He counted the silos to keep from thinking. There were always an even number by the time he made himself stop. He made sure of it. The woman at the front table was the county clerk. Her name was Deb Tash, and she had worked the job 19 years. She counted his 10 ones twice, the way she counted everything. Then she slid the manila envelope of keys across the table. She told him she was sorry about the condition of the place. She told him softer that he ought to think hard before spending a night in a condemned building with winter coming on. He thanked her. He took the keys. The station sat half a mile down a county road at the south edge of the village. He walked it. He went past the shuttered foundry, past the IGA, past a bait shop with a hand-painted sign in the window. Kettle Bend had not kept its own police for 11 years. The village had handed the work to the county sheriff the same season the foundry let go of its last shift. A town of 1,300 could no longer find a soul willing to wear the badge for what it could pay. After that, the building was locked and left. The county quit mailing tax notices on it, after a while, the way counties do with things nobody is ever going to pay for. The tamaracks along the ditch had gone gold. They were dropping their soft needles into the frost-stiff grass, the way they do up there in late October. The one evergreen that isn't. The building was one-story, brick, with a flat roof that sagged in the middle, like a tired man's shoulders. The front door took 3 tries before the right key turned. Inside, the air was colder than the air outdoors, and still, it held 2 smells he would come to know better than his own name: old paper and gun oil. He stood in the doorway and let his eyes adjust. 2 steel desks were shoved against the near wall. A dispatch board hung above them with every bulb burned out. A calendar was still turned to the month the place had closed. A coffee mug had gone black on the inside. A swivel chair sat with the stuffing pushing out through a split seat. Dust lay over all of it in a soft, even gray, the way snow lies over a field nobody crosses. On a hook by the back door hung a man's canvas chore coat, gone stiff with the cold. A thermos sat on the shelf above it, the cap screwed down tight. Wyatt did not touch either one. They had the look of things a person means to come back for. He knew that look. He had owned almost nothing his whole life, but the little he owned he had always packed as if he might be called away from it without notice. These things were packed the same way. And at the back, set into the cinder block, a steel door. It was painted the same tired gray as the walls. He almost walked right past it. Across the middle, in white letters worn thin, a single word had been stenciled by hand: property. Whatever hand wrote it had brushed past it 1,000 times. The door had its own lock, heavier than the others. A second lock sat below the first. He tried every key in the envelope. Not one of them fit. He stood there a long time. When the light began to go, he did the thing he always did in a new place. He walked it corner to corner and put it in order in his head. He set the toppled chair upright and squared it to the desk. He lined the dead bulbs in a row on the blotter, 2 by 2. An odd one left over made something in his chest sit wrong. In the bottom drawer he found a stub of carpenter's pencil. He turned it over in his fingers. Without quite deciding to, he slid it into his pocket beside the broken one he had carried since he was 9. He had no plan past the next cold hour. He owned a building nobody wanted and a door he could not open. Outside, the wind found the gap under the front sill. It moved through the room like something looking for a place to lie down. He decided he was not leaving, not yet. The cold woke him before the light did. He had slept on the floor behind the front desk with his jacket over him and the backpack for a pillow. At some point in the night, the wind had laid down. The quiet that came after it went deeper than any quiet he could remember. He lay still and listened to it. Out on one of the Kettle lakes, a single goose called and got no answer. He had slept maybe 5 hours straight through. That was more than he had slept in one piece in months. He did not understand it. A freezing concrete floor in a dead building had given him something a dozen warm beds in a dozen warm houses never had. He thought, lying there in the dark, that maybe a building remembers being needed. Maybe a place that spent 30 years holding what mattered to people could not entirely forget how. It was a foolish thought, and he knew it. He was a practical boy. But the floor was cold and the quiet was kind. He let himself have the foolish thought, just the once, the way you let yourself have a thing you cannot afford on a day you have stopped counting. He got up stiff and started to clean, because he did not know what else to do with his hands. He swept first. He found a push broom in a closet and worked the dust into long gray windrows. He carried them out the back door in a coffee can. The work warmed him. There was a plainness to it that he liked. He hauled the split chair out to the curb. He stacked the dead calendars in a corner. He wiped the dispatch board until the names of streets came up faint under the grime. He read them like a map of a town he had bought one corner of. He worked through the morning that way. The work asked nothing of him but his hands, and his hands were glad of it. Had always been good in an empty room. An empty room could not change its mind about you. By the time the sun cleared the tamaracks, the front of the station looked like a place again. He stood in the middle of it, breathing the cold, oddly content. He could not have said the last time he felt that either. By mid-morning he reached the property officer's desk. It stood apart from the others against the back wall near the steel door. The top drawer was locked. He could have left it. He had left 100 locked drawers in 100 houses that were never his. But this one was his. The whole sad building was his. There was something about a lock on the inside of his own front door that he could not let alone. He worked the drawer with a flat bar from the closet, gentle, the way you ease a sliver instead of yanking it. The old wood let go without splitting. Inside, on a bed of rubber bands gone brittle, lay a ledger bound in green cloth. It was thick. The corners had gone soft from handling. The spine was creased white where a thumb had opened it 10,000 times to the same place. He lifted it out with both hands. He did not know yet that he would carry that book the rest of his life. He only knew two things in that moment. It was heavier than a book that size had any right to be, and when he opened it, the smell of the whole building rose up out of the pages at once. The handwriting was small and square and patient. Across the top of each page ran the same columns, ruled by hand with a straight-edge date. Property number, case or incident, item, recovered from, disposition. Every line was filled in that same careful print, and beside the date, out in the margin where it had no business being, someone had written a number with a small degree mark after it. He puzzled at it a while before he understood. It was the temperature. Whoever kept this book had written down, every single day, how cold or warm it had been when a thing crossed his desk. A man who would do that, Wyatt thought, believed the weather of a day was part of the truth of it. He read the first page standing up by the window light. Property number 0001, 31 years back, 14 degrees that morning. One boy's bicycle, blue, recovered from the ditch on County F, returned to owner. There was a line of small print after it, and Wyatt read that twice. The word the man used was not found. It was never on any page found. The word was always recovered, as if everything that came through that room had not been lost so much as carried off, and was only waiting to be carried back. Wyatt read on. He read the way you eat when you have been hungry a long time too fast without tasting. He read about a wedding ring turned in at the tavern and held 4 years before the widow came for it. He read about a hunting rifle taken in a quarrel between two brothers. It had been kept until both of them cooled enough to shake hands over the counter. He read the small dramas of a small town set down without judgment in that square hand, each one numbered, each one weighed, each one given its degree of cold. There was an entry he went back to twice. A pair of eyeglasses recovered at the bus stop, no owner named. Held 9 years. In the disposition column, the man had written a single line, smaller than the rest. A person who loses their glasses cannot read the notice telling them where to look. After that, the ledger showed a change. Royce had started running the lost and found notice in the church bulletin, not only the paper. He wrote nothing about why. The numbers simply began to find their people faster. Then he turned a page near the middle of the book and stopped. The temperature in the margin was 41 degrees. The date was a day in March, and the line read only this, a small thing, recovered, held. It was the one entry in the whole book with no property number and no name. He nearly passed it, but the date snagged on something in him the way a nail snags wool. He knew that date. It was written on the misspelled folder in his backpack. It was the one official paper that had followed him through every house and every school and every county in the state. It was the day he had been born. He looked up from the book for the first time in an hour. The light had moved across the floor while he read. His heart was going in a way he had no name for. He told himself it meant nothing. Dates repeat. A town has a birthday every day of the year. He told himself that, and he did not believe it, and he was still holding the open book against his chest when he heard tires on the gravel out front. A truck had pulled into the lot. It was an old Ford. Rust the color of a clay pot was blooming through the orange paint. A woman was climbing down out of slow, one hand on the door and one on a foil-covered pan. She was small and bent and easily 80. She wore a quilted coat and a wool hat pulled to her eyebrows. She came up the walk a step at a time, and once she stopped to catch her breath in the cold. Wyatt set the ledger down and went to the door. She stopped at the threshold and would not cross it. She looked at him a long moment at his face, then her eyes went down to his hands, and something moved across her own face that he could not read. She held the pan out to him. 7-layer bars, she said, the kind with the butterscotch. A boy could not start a winter on nothing. He took the pan because he did not know how to refuse a thing offered with 2 hands. I'm Lorraine, she said, Lorraine Pelto. I was the village clerk here 40 years. Back when the village still had a clerk. She looked past him into the room. She took in the swept floor, the squared chair, the open desk. You've been cleaning, she said. He kept it just that clean. Then she looked at Wyatt's hands again, the way they hung at his sides, and her voice changed. You've got his hands, she said. Bet you file things the same ways too. Square to the edge. Wyatt said he didn't know whose hands he had. He said it flat, the way he said most things. But something underneath it must have shown. The old woman's eyes filled, and she pressed her lips together, and she did not let it spill. She came inside then. She moved through the room touching things. The dispatch board, the desk, the green ledger on the blotter. Her fingers were light, as if it all might still be evidence. She told him she had buried 2 husbands and a sister in this town. She told him she had been waiting a long time to drive out to this building. She had told herself she would know the day it was right. She did not say right for what. She picked up the ledger and held it to her chest the way he had held it. And Wyatt understood, without being told, that she had known the man who wrote it. Royce kept this place alive on his own dime, long after the village quit, she said. Longer than anybody knew but me. Folks thought it just sat here rotting. It didn't sit. It waited. She set the ledger down and ran her thumb over the green cloth, once the way you touch a sleeping child's hair. He wouldn't write a thing in ink until he'd set it down in pencil first, she said, to no one in particular. Said ink was for when you were sure. And a man is hardly ever sure the first time. She laughed a small, dry laugh that turned into a cough. Then she went quiet, and the quiet had a whole life folded inside it, and Wyatt did not break it. She would not say more than that. He pressed her once, gently, and she shook her head. Some things had to come to a person in their own order, she said, or they would not stick. But before she left, she reached into the pocket of her coat. She took out a small thing wrapped in a man's white handkerchief. She put it in his palm and closed his fingers over it. He gave it to me to keep, she said, the winter before he passed. Made me promise I'd hold it until the right one came, and not a day longer. I've held it 11 months. She looked at the steel door at the back of the room, at its worn white word. I expect you'll know which lock. Then she went out to her truck. She let it warm a long while before she drove away. He stood in the doorway and watched the orange truck go small on the county road. Then he peeled back the foil on the pan. He ate one of the bars standing up in the cold, and the sweetness of it was almost more than he could stand. He could not remember the last time someone had made him something warm with their own hands. He made himself stop at one, covered the rest and set the pan square in the middle of the desk, where he would see it. Then he unwrapped the handkerchief in the gray light. Inside was a brass key, dark with handling with a tag on a string. The tag said one word in that same square hand, "Property." He crossed the room. The key fit the upper lock, then the lower. His hands were not entirely steady. The bolt gave with a sound like a held breath let go. The steel door swung in on a darkness that smelled of paper and cold metal, and faintly of cedar. Wyatt found a switch by the frame. A bare bulb came on overhead and swung a little on its cord. The light fell across a room he had not let himself imagine. It was small, no bigger than a bedroom. 3 walls were lined floor to ceiling with steel shelving, and every shelf was full. Brown paper bags and small cardboard boxes and manila envelopes, hundreds of them. Each one sealed, each one tagged. Each tag bore a number and a date in that square print. The order of it stopped his breath more than any mess could have. This was not the room of a town that had forgotten its things. This was the room of a man who had refused, for 30 years, to let one single thing be forgotten. He stepped inside. The numbers on the shelves ran in sequence, the way the ledger ran. He understood then that the green book and this room were one thing in 2 halves. The book was the map. The room was the country. He pulled a bag down at random. The seal was a strip of red evidence tape gone amber with age. Over the seam, someone had written his initials and a date. That was how the tape is meant to be signed. Anyone could see at a glance that no hand had opened it since the hand that closed it. Inside was a man's wristwatch, the band cracked, and a slip of paper folded to fit. He matched the number to the ledger, a watch recovered after a break-in at the hardware store, owner unknown. In the disposition column was not the word a property room usually writes there, not destroyed, not auctioned, holding for owner. Then 3 dates, years apart, each with a single note beside it. Wrote the family, no answer. Wrote again. And then the last line in smaller print, he'll come for it or he won't. A man's things are his. Wyatt sat down on the cold floor of that room with the watch in his hand. He did not move for a while. When he could move again, he found a pencil and a scrap of paper and started a list of his own, not of the things, of the questions. Who, why, how long? He had never been a boy who asked questions out loud, but the room seemed to expect them. He found that on paper he could ask anything. He pinned the list to the shelf at eye level. By the end of the first day, it had 4 questions. By the end of the third, it had none. The room kept answering faster than he could write, and every answer weighed more than the question had. He learned the room the way he had learned the building, by ordering it. Over the next days he matched bag to number, and number to ledger. The life of the place came up out of the paper. There was a saxophone a high school boy had pawned and never redeemed, kept against the day he might want it back. There was a wedding dress folded in tissue, water-stained. The note with it said the bride had passed, and the mother could not bear to keep the dress or to throw it away. So Royce had taken it from her and given it a number. A number, Wyatt was learning, was a kind of keeping that asked nothing of you in return. There were lost dogs' collars and a cigar box of letters tied with string. There was a child's tooth in a small coin envelope, and that one he did not let himself look at, twice. There was a man's wedding band with a date filed inside it, turned in by a wife who said she did not want it in the house anymore. Royce had not argued with her. He had given it a number and set it on the shelf. 3 years on, she had come back for it, and the ledger noted only that the weather that day was fine. There was a purple heart in a velvet box, recovered from a pawn shop, the soldier's name still on the back. Royce had spent 2 winters finding the family. There was a single red mitten, child's size, no match, held against the chance the other might turn up. It never had. He had kept the one anyway. After a while he stopped reading the dispositions out loud. They were all the same in the end, and the sameness undid him a little each time. The man had run his room by one law. The law was simple. A thing did not stop belonging to a person just because the person had stopped being able to reach it. He came to understand the rules by reading them in the man's hand. Nothing went on a shelf until it had been written down twice. Once in the book, once a tag, so that losing one could never lose the thing. Nothing was sealed without the date and the initials laid over the seam, so the seal told its own story. And nothing was thrown out for being old. Old was not a reason. There were only 2 reasons a thing ever left that room. The owner came, or the owner's people came. Everything else, the man simply kept and counted and kept again. On the 3rd afternoon, a man came by from the hardware store in town. His name was Gill, and he had run the store 30 years, and he had heard a boy was living out at the old station. He did not make a thing of it. He carried in a kerosene heater under one arm and a 5-gallon can under the other. He set them down inside the door without being asked. "Pay me when the place makes you rich," he said, and he almost smiled. Then he looked the demolition rumor square in the face. "Heard the county wants it down by Thanksgiving," he said. "Be a shame. My boy learned to ride his bike in that lot. He would not take $1. Wyatt watched his truck go and felt something he had no practice feeling. That night, for the first time, the room was warm enough that he took his jacket off to sleep. He could not sleep, warm or not. He lay on the floor with the green ledger open on his chest and the heater ticking in the dark. He kept up coming back to the entry with no number. A small thing recovered, held, 41 degrees, the day he was born. He turned it over the way he turned the broken pencil without knowing why he could not set it down. Men did not keep what they did not want. That was the one thing the world had taught him plainly. And here was a room that had kept everything. It was run by a man he had never met. In a town he had reached by accident. On a road he had walked because a shelter would have put him out by 8. On the 4th day a woman came to the door. She was middle-aged in scrubs on her lunch from the clinic 2 towns over. She had heard from her aunt, who had heard from somebody at the IGA that the old station was open. A young fellow was going through the property, they said. She stood at the threshold the way Lorraine had, half afraid to cross it. Her father had died in the spring, she said. Years back, the police had taken his pocket watch in a dispute over the family estate. It had never come back. Her father had gone to his grave saying the watch had been his own father's. It had crossed from Norway sewn into a coat lining. She didn't suppose. She knew it was a long shot. She just thought with the place open. Wyatt knew the number before he found the bag. He had read its line 3 nights running without understanding why it stayed with him. Watch. Gold, recovered in the matter of the Aldous estate, held. Wrote the family. No answer. Wrote again. The brother said keep it. And then the last line. Someday somebody will want this enough to come. He cut the amber tape and put the watch in the woman's hand. She made a sound he would not try to describe. She pressed it to her mouth, and she cried in the doorway of a condemned building for a father who had been right all along. She tried to give him money. He would not take it. He had no words for why, but he had read enough of the Green Book by then to know one thing for certain. The man who built that room had never once written a price in the disposition column. Wyatt was not going to be the one to start. Word went around the way word goes around a town that size. By the end of the week, 3 more people had come up the walk. A man asked after his late brother's shotgun and went home with it wrapped in a feed sack, not saying much, his eyes wet. A woman came for nothing in particular. She only wanted to stand in the doorway and tell Wyatt that Royce had once driven her boy home from a bad night and never told a soul. Wyatt did not know what to do with any of it. So he did what the ledger did. He wrote their names down, and the date, and the weather, and let that be the keeping. That was the afternoon Deb Tash drove out with the notice. She did not want to, he could see that plainly. She came up the walk with a folded paper held against her chest like it had a weight to it. She stood on the step and could not quite meet his eye. The county had to act on the engineer's report, she said. The order was signed. The building would come down. She read him the date. It was 30 days out, Friday after Thanksgiving. She told him the contents would be inventoried as abandoned county property and disposed of according to schedule. She said disposed of. Then she looked past him at the open steel door, at all those numbered bags, and the words seemed to taste wrong in her mouth. She lowered the paper. There might be a way to challenge it, she said quietly. Off the record. Clerk to citizen. A hearing. A claim of ownership on the cons, separate from the building. She couldn't promise it would go anywhere. But she had been signing papers in that county 19 years. She had never liked the ones that turned a man's whole careful life into a line item. She left him the notice, the date, and a phone number. Then she drove off slower than she had come. 30 days. Wyatt taped the notice to the dispatch board, square to the edge, and stood looking at it until the light went. He did the math that night by the heater. 30 days. He had no lawyer and no money and a claim he did not know how to make. He had a building under a death sentence and a room full of other people's lives inside it. A week ago he would have walked. Walking was the one skill the system had taught him well. You did not fight for a place. You did not let a place become a thing you could lose. But he kept looking at the corner he had not opened. There was a bag back there with no proper number. It sat behind the ammunition box, where a man hides what he cannot bear to file with the rest. And for the first time in his life, leaving felt like the thing that would cost the most. Lorraine came back the next morning with more bars and the rest of the story, as much of it as she would give in one sitting. She sat in the swivel chair he had mended with a board and a strip of webbing. She warmed her hands around a cup of the coffee he had learned to make on the camp stove, and she told him about Royce Halvorsen. He ran this room 30 years, she said, never wore a gun, never wanted to. The chief carried the badge and chased what needed chasing. Royce kept the things. People in town thought it was a small job. Lorraine had never thought so. She had watched him drive 40 miles in a blizzard once to put a dead boy's class ring back in his mother's hand, on his own time, on his own gas. She had decided then that the smallest job in that building was the one holding all the rest of it up. She told him Royce had a son. The son had married badly and died young, and there had been a child. There had been a custody fight after that. Royce had lost it, the way men like Royce lose things. Quietly and completely. He lost it to people with louder lawyers, and to a judge who measured a home by its square footage. There had been an order after that. The kind of order that tells a man he may not call, may not write, may not stand at the edge of a schoolyard. Royce read it once, Lorraine said. He folded it, and he never broke it a single day in 17 years. She told him there had been one hearing where Royce was allowed to speak. He stood up in his good coat and said 11 words, and then he sat down. The lawyer had told him that saying more would only hurt the boy's placement. Lorraine had been in the room. She would not tell Wyatt what the 11 words were. She said a man ought to be able to keep one thing for himself, even out of a story like this one. Especially out of a story like this one. Wyatt asked what happened to the child. Lorraine looked at him a long time before she answered. The state took him, she said, bounced him town to town. Royce couldn't get near, so he did the only thing the law left him to do. She nodded at the green ledger on the blotter and at the steel door behind it. Her voice went down to almost nothing. He kept the chain, she said. He couldn't have the boy, so he kept the chain of him instead. Wyatt did not yet understand all of what she meant, but something in him had begun to turn slowly toward the understanding. The way a plant turns in the dark toward a window it cannot see. If you've made it this far into Wyatt's story, take a second and subscribe, because what he found next is the part I have been waiting the whole time to tell you. because there was one bag he had not opened. It sat by itself on the bottom shelf, in the corner, behind the steel ammunition box that took him both hands to move. It was not numbered like the others. The rest of the room ran in that long, careful sequence. This one had a series of its own, written smaller and tighter, as if the hand had been less steady, or more afraid. And on the tag, where every other tag in that room named a watch or a ring or a rifle, this one named a person. It named him. Renner W. Under the name ran a string of dates that went 17 years deep. Wyatt's hands were not steady at all now. He cut the tape. He unrolled the top of the bag. Inside, laid in order the way everything that man ever touched was laid in order, was a hospital identification band. It was the small kind they fasten around a newborn's ankle. The ink had faded, but the time of birth was legible at the edge. There was a baby tooth in a coin envelope, the same kind he had not let himself look at twice. There was a school photograph of a boy of 6, with a chipped front tooth and a haircut somebody had done at home. And there were slips of paper, dozens of them. Each one bore an address and a date. They were the addresses of every house he had ever been sent to live in. Each was set down in that square, patient hand on the day he arrived. As if a man 40 miles away had been keeping the chain of custody on a life he was never once allowed to hold. Wyatt knelt on the cold floor and did not touch any of it. He was afraid that touching it would make it true. And he was more afraid that it already was. Down under the slips of paper, his fingers found the edge of something stiffer. An envelope. His name was on the front, in that same square hand, and the envelope had never been opened. It had been waiting all this time for the only person it was addressed to. For a long while he did not open it. He sat back on his heels on the cold floor and held the envelope in both hands. His name looked strange in that square hand. Formal the way a name looks on a document and not on a folder tab. He was afraid of it. He had spent 18 years learning to want nothing. And here was a thing that wanted to give him something, and he had no muscle built for the taking. He thought about closing the bag. He thought about it the way you think about turning back on a road you have already come too far down. If he never read it, then nothing inside it could be true. And nothing being true was a country he knew how to live in. He had lived there his whole life. It was cold and it was safe, and it asked nothing of him. But his thumb was already under the flap. So he did what the man would have done. He set the contents out first in a row before he let himself read a word. The hospital band, the tooth in its little envelope, the photograph of a boy with a chipped tooth and a haircut done at a kitchen table, the slips of paper, by date, oldest to most recent. He squared each one to the edge of the shelf with the side of his thumb. Only when his whole life lay in order in front of him did he turn the envelope over and break the seal. The paper inside was folded in thirds, the creases sharp. It was folded the way a careful man folds a thing he means to outlast him. The same square covered both sides. Wyatt read it by the light of the swinging bulb, slowly, the way you read a thing you are afraid to reach the end of. To the boy whose name is on this bag. I will write this the way I write everything in here. Plainly. Plain is the only thing I was ever any good at. My name is Royce Halvorsen. I was your grandfather. Your father Daniel was my son. He died young, and your grandmother before him. By the time you read this, I will be gone too. There is no one left for this letter to hurt now. That is the only reason I am finally allowed to write it. When your father passed, there was a fight over who would raise you. I lost it. I will not set down here the things that were said about me in that room. Some of them were true. The rest do not matter anymore. What matters is that a judge signed an order. The order said I was not to call you, or write to you, or come near wherever they sent you. I read it one time, I folded it, and I kept it, the way I keep everything. Understand that I did not stay away because I stopped. I stayed away because the law that took you was the same law I had served my whole life in this little room. I did not know how to keep faith with one half of it and break the other. Maybe a braver man would have broken it. I thought about it on certain nights. There is a thing I nearly did the winter you turned 9 when I learned where they had. But I will not finish that. Some things a man keeps for himself. So I did the one thing left that was mine to do. I gave you a number, not in the county's book, in a book of my own. Every time the state moved you, word reached me. A small county is a small county, and an old clerk hears things. And every time I wrote it down, where you were, the date, how cold it was, so that somewhere in the world there would be one true record, that you were real, that you were accounted for. That nobody had thrown you away, whatever the paperwork said. A chain of custody is only a promise written down. It says a thing was watched over. It says no hand let go of it without signing the next hand on. There is an account at the bank in your name. I put a little in on the days that belong to you, your birthday. The first day of each school year I could find out about. It is not much. A property clerk does not make much, but it has been yours since before you were old enough to want it. The building is yours now too, if you are reading this. I paid what it owed for as long as my hands would let me. I did not want them taking the room before you had the chance to find it. Every bag on those shelves is a person somebody refused to forget. You are the one I refused hardest. I am sorry I could only keep the chain. I would rather have kept you. Wyatt read it twice. Then a third time, slower, the way you walk back over ground to find a thing you dropped. He stopped at the line that did not finish. The winter you turned 9 when I learned where they had, and then nothing but white paper. He sat with the space after the dash a long while. He had been 9 the year of the trailer on County M. He did not let himself wonder what the man had nearly done. He thought he understood why a person leaves a sentence open on purpose. Some doors you shut so the other one does not have to. He did not cry the way people cry in stories. He had never learned to do that out loud. What he did was take the broken pencil out of his pocket, the stub he had carried since he was 9. He held it in his fist until the edges hurt. He had kept that pencil for no reason he had ever been able to name. He understood now that he had been keeping a chain of his own all along, of one small thing. Against the day someone might finally tell him it had meant something. It took him a while to notice the passbook. It had slipped to the bottom of the bag, a small booklet bound in faded blue, the cover gone soft-clothed as cloth. He opened it. Inside ran columns of deposits in that same square hand, copied over from the bank's stamped lines, going back 17 years. The amounts were small. $10, $20. Once in a better year, 50. He turned to the last page and found the running total written at the bottom. $58,742.16. He sat with the number a moment. It was not a fortune, and he knew enough by now to know the man had never tried to make it one. It was something else. It was 17 years of a clerk's small wages, set aside $10 at a time for a boy he was forbidden to feed. Then he looked at the dates beside the deposits, and the floor seemed to tilt under him. He laid the passbook open beside the slips of paper, the ones with the foster addresses, and he matched them the way he had matched bag to ledger all week. When they moved him to the Eklund place out past Rib Lake, there was a deposit that same Friday. When the Eklunds gave him back and he went to the group home in Medford, another, Birch Street, Stetson Avenue, a trailer on County M he had spent years trying to forget. Every address had its date, and beside every date, within the week, $10. The deposits were not only on his birthdays, they fell on the days he was moved. On the very days a stranger's door had closed behind a boy in a new town, a man 40 miles away had walked into a bank and marked it. Not with worry, with a record, with a small stubborn act of keeping that no one would ever see. He understood it then, all of it, in one cold rush. Royce had always known where he was, every house, every town, every single time. The order had said the man could not come, and the man had not come. But he had never once not known. For 17 years a grandfather had stood exactly 1 law's width away from his grandson Ron, close enough to write down the address, far enough to keep the promise that had taken the boy from him in the first place. He had not been lost, not for 1 day of it. He had been watched the whole time, accounted for the whole time, by a hand he never saw and a name he was never told. Wyatt had spent his entire life believing one thing about himself, and the thing was simple. Nobody had wanted him. Every empty birthday had said it. Every misspelled folder had said it. The world had said it so often and so plainly that he had stopped arguing and started agreeing. And now, on a cold floor, in a room nobody else had wanted either, the belief came apart in his hands like wet paper. It had never been true. It had only been unanswered. He had been wanted. He had been kept. He had only never been allowed to know it. He was still sitting there when he heard the Ford on the gravel. Lorraine came in slower than before, leaning on the doorframe to catch her breath. She saw the bag open on the floor and the slips laid out in their row and the blue passbook and his face. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she crossed to the mended chair and lowered herself into it, and she folded her hands in her lap and she gave him the last of it. The part she had been carrying alone for 11 months. He passed in February, she said. In the home out by the county line, they called me at 4:10 in the morning because mine was the only number left in his book. The nurse said he went in his sleep. No fuss, the way he did everything. Lorraine looked down at her folded hands. 4 months, she said. 4 months before you'd have aged out, and there'd have been no order left to keep him away. He almost made it. He counted it down on a calendar by his bed. I saw it the last time I sat with him. Wyatt asked her quietly what the calendar said. It said the date you turned 18, she answered, circled in pencil, nothing written on it. He didn't need to write what it meant. She was quiet a moment. He got smaller that last year, she said, the way they do, but his hands never lost it. Right to the end, he'd straighten the blanket like he was squaring a page. The nurses thought he was confused. He wasn't. He was just keeping things in order the only way left to him. She told him the rest then, the 2 promises Royce had drawn from her at the end. The first was to keep the brass key until the right one came and not a day longer. The second she had not understood at the time. He had taken her hand, she said, and told her plainly. The boy will need somewhere to land. Lorraine had thought he was wandering, the way the dying wander. She knew better now. She had known better the moment she saw a stranger's truck was not in the lot, and a thin boy was sweeping out a dead building like it mattered. She had not told him sooner, she said, because Royce had been firm on that too. The boy has to come to it himself, he'd told her, or it won't hold. A thing handed over too fast is a thing a person can hand right back, so she had waited. She had brought bars and said little and watched him find the book on his own, and the room on his own, and now the truth on his own. It was the hardest promise she ever kept. It was also, she thought, the only way it could have taken root. They drove out to the cemetery that afternoon in the orange truck. It was a small Lutheran burying ground on a rise above one of the Kettle lakes. The grass had already gone brown and the tamaracks stood bare against the gray. The Halvorsen stones ran in a short row near the back fence, behind a leaning iron gate. Wyatt found his grandmother first. Then he found Daniel Halvorsen, his father, a name he had never once heard, spoken aloud in 18 years, dead at 31. He stood over that one a while. He had never let himself build a picture of his father, because you cannot lose what you never let yourself draw. Now there was a date, and a stone, and the cold fact of a man who had been somewhere in the world and then was not. He would never know him. That door had closed long before this one opened, and no letter waited behind it. He found he could hold that now. A person could be grieved and never known. He had spent his whole life doing the opposite, knowing people he was not allowed to grieve. This was only the salesman's loss turned around. And beside it stood Royce. The stone was newer than the rest, the carving still sharp at the edges. The word beloved was not on it. The man would never have allowed a word he had not earned in writing. It said only his name and the 2 dates, and below them 3 words Lorraine said he had chosen for it himself, years before he needed it. He kept the record. Wyatt stood there a long time in the wind off the lake. He had no flowers and would not have known what to do with them. So he took the broken pencil out of his pocket instead, the stub he had carried half his life. He set it down against the base of the stone, in the lee, where the wind would not take it. It was the only thing he had ever owned that he had kept the way the man kept things. It seemed right that it should stay with him. They did not talk much on the drive back. Lorraine kept her eyes on the lake road and let the boy have his quiet, the way she had let Royce have his all those years. Once, without looking over, she said that grief and gratitude were closer kin than most people let on. Wyatt did not answer, but he turned it over the rest of the way home, the way he turned everything, and he found that it fit. When they got back to the station, the light was going, and Deb Tash's notice was still taped to the dispatch board, square to the edge. 30 days had become 11. Wyatt read the number on the order again and the date and the phone number at the bottom. A week ago he would already have been gone. Walking was the one skill the system had taught him to do well. You did not fight for a place. You did not let a place become a thing that could be taken from you. But the green book was on the desk. The row of slips was on the shelf. A man's whole quiet life was waiting on a county schedule to be carried out to a dumpster and stamped abandoned. That night he read the green ledger from the first page to the last, every line the way you read scripture you have decided to believe. He read 30 years of a town's lost things finding their way home. He read the temperature in every margin. And somewhere past midnight he stopped being afraid of the room because he finally understood what it was. It was not a record of things. It was a record of a man refusing, over and over, every cold day for 30 years, to let go. He found the bicycle on the first page again, number 0001, 14 degrees, returned to its owner 31 years before Wyatt was born. He found the eyeglasses, held 9 years. He found the watch the woman in scrubs had wept over. And near the middle he found the entry with no number, the one that had stopped him cold the first day. A small thing, recovered, held. 41 degrees. He knew now what the small thing had been. He had carried it into the building on his own 2 feet, and it had taken a dead man's book to tell him what he was. In the morning he picked up the phone. He dialed the number at the bottom of the notice, and for the first time in 18 years of being moved without his say, Wyatt Renner asked to stay. The hearing was set for the Monday before Thanksgiving. It was held in the county boardroom, a low-ceilinged place with folding tables and a flag on a stand, and a pitcher of water nobody touched. Wyatt wore the only collared shirt he owned, washed in the station sink and dried by the kerosene heater overnight. He had written out what he meant to say on a property slip. 3 lines, because 3 lines was all he trusted himself to get through without his voice going. He had no lawyer. He had Deb Tash, who was not allowed to speak for him, but who had quietly made sure the matter got onto the agenda at all. He need not have worried about the 3 lines. By the time the board chairman called the item, the folding chairs were full. Then the wall behind them was lined, and people were still coming in out of the cold, stamping the snow off their boots. The woman in scrubs was there, her father's watch on a chain at her throat. Gil from the hardware store was there, turning his cap in his hands. The man who had carried his brother's shotgun home in a feed sack was there in the back with his wife. So was the woman whose boy Royst once driven home from a bad night and never told a soul. None of them had been asked to come. Word had gone around the way it does in a town that size, and the town had simply come, the way it comes to a funeral or a fire. When the chairman asked who wished to be heard, Lorraine Pelto stood up first, one hand braced on the chair in front of her. She did not make a speech. She said she had been the village clerk 40 years and had known Royce Halvorsen, every one of them. She said that man had spent 30 years giving this town back the things it lost, and never once charged it a dime or asked it for thanks. She said the room behind that steel door was not abandoned property by any meaning of the word. It was the longest plain act of decency she had ever watched a person commit. She said she would not sit in a warm room and watch the county haul it to the dump. Then she sat down. Her hands were shaking, and the woman in scrubs each reached over without a word and held one of them. One by one the others stood and said their small piece, the watch, the shotgun. The boy driven home in the dark, a man none of them had expected, stood and said the station had given his mother's wedding ring back to him after she died, when he'd thought it gone for good. None of them spoke long. None of them needed to. By the time the last one sat down, the thing the county was being asked to bulldoze had 100 faces in the room, and every one of them was turned toward the front, waiting. Wyatt had not read one of his 3 lines. He sat with the folded slip in his hand and felt something he had no practice feeling. It took him most of the night later to find a name for it. It was not relief. It was the particular warmth of being stood up for, in a room in front of strangers, by people who owed him nothing. He had spent 18 years being spoken about. He had never once until that night been spoken for. The chairman conferred with the others in low voices for a while. Then he ruled that the contents of the property room were the rightful possession of the man's heir, and that the heir had established his claim. The demolition order on the building was tabled, pending a fresh review of the structure. There was no triumphant speech and no gavel coming down. It was only a tired man in a cardigan deciding on a Monday night before a holiday to let a thing stand. But the room let out a breath all at once. Somebody in the back started to clap, and Wyatt sat very still and looked down at the 3 lines he had not had to read. He folded the slip and put it in his pocket, square against the seam where the deed had ridden a month before. Outside in the cold, the townspeople did not scatter right away. They stood in the lot a while in their coats, talking low the way people do after a funeral that turns out to be a christening. Gil clapped him once on the shoulder and said nothing, which from Gil was a paragraph. Wyatt drove home in the dark with the heater ticking, past the shuttered foundry and the dark IGA. The building was waiting for him with one light on, because he had left it burning himself that morning. He had never in his life left a light on for his own return. By the next autumn, the tamaracks had gone gold again, and the old station did not look like a dead building anymore. Gil and 2 other men had patched the roof over a long summer of Saturdays and would not take pay for that either. The dispatch board had new bulbs in it now. Wyatt left the old calendar where it was, though still turned to the month the place had closed, because some things were a kind of record, too. The front room had a wood stove now and a coffee pot that worked, and 2 good chairs set by the window. One of the chairs was Lorraine's. She came most mornings the weather allowed and sat, and watched the lake road and told him things about the man he would never have known to ask. The steel door stood open all day now. Wyatt had taken the heavy lock off it entirely and dropped it in a drawer. He had spent that first winter and spring doing what the room had always been for. He worked the old ledger backward, bag by bag, and he found the people the numbers belonged to, or their children, or their children's children. He ran the lost and found notices in the church bulletin the way Royce had finally learned to. He drove a dead boys class ring 40 miles through a March rain to a woman who had stopped believing she would ever hold it again. He learned slowly what it took out of a man to do that and why a man might keep doing it anyway. The shelves emptied a little that year, for the first time in 3 decades. Each empty space on them was a thing that had been carried home. Not every search ended well. Some families had moved away and left no forwarding. Some did not want the thing back, or did not want to remember why the law had taken it. A few never answered at all. Wyatt let those bags sit and kept them, because keeping was the whole of the point. A thing did not stop belonging to its owner just because the owner had gone quiet. He was learning that the room had never promised to fix anything. It had only ever promised not to forget. And then a strange thing began to happen in Kettle Bend. People started bringing things in. A widow brought her husband's pocket knife because she could not keep it in the house and could not throw it in the lake. A man brought a shoebox of his mother's letters he was not ready to read and not willing to burn. A girl no more than 10 came in holding a dog's collar in both hands and would not say a word, and Wyatt did not make her. They did not always know why they had come. They only knew the town had a place again where a thing could be set down and kept and not lost. A place where somebody would write it in a book and account for it. Wyatt took each one in. He gave it a number. He laid the date and his initials over the seal, the way the tape is meant to be signed. He began to keep certain hours, posted on a card by the door in his square new hand. Tuesday and Saturday mornings, and any time the light was on. Children came to look at the saxophone and the medal and the single red mitten, and he let them, because a thing kept is meant to be seen and not only stored. Old men came to sit and argue about the foundry years. The room that had been sealed for a decade became, without anyone quite deciding it, the warmest room in town. The green ledger was nearly full by then, only a few of Royce's pages left blank behind the last. So Wyatt started a new book, bound in plain black, and he kept it the way the old one had taught him to. He wrote the temperature in the margin. He had not planned to. His hand had simply learned the habit from the pages it had read all winter, the way a boy learns a walk from a man he never got to meet. He wrote the word recovered and never found. And on the first line of the first page, he made the entry he had been saving up the nerve to make all year. The date was late October. The margin read 33 degrees. One green ledger recovered, returned to its keeper. He signed his initials under it. Then he closed the black book and set it square to the edge of the desk, beside the old one, where the 2 of them caught the same window light. He thought, signing it, that a record was a strange kind of love. It made no sound, asked for nothing back. It only sat in a drawer in the cold, being true, until the day somebody needed it to be. He had not believed in much growing up. He found that he could believe in that. The phone rang once, late that same fall, from a number with a downstate area code. It was a woman, his mother's sister, who had read about the station in a paper that ran the story over the wire. She did not say much. She did not say she was sorry, and she did not ask to come. And after a while there did not seem to be anything left on the line but the cost of the call. Wyatt did not push. He had stopped needing every door in the world to open. Some chains break, and a man learns to carry the broken end without making a sound about it. That is its own kind of keeping. He thanked her for calling. He did not give her the address. He never did learn what the 11 words were that Royce had said at the custody hearing all those years ago. Lorraine carried them to the end of her own days and would not give them up, no matter how he asked. In time, he came to be glad of it. A man was allowed to keep one thing for himself, especially out of a story like this one. Lorraine Pelto passed 2 winters after that, in her sleep, in her own bed, with the orange truck still parked in the yard. Wyatt logged the date in the black book and the temperature, the way she would have wanted, though there was nothing of hers left to recover. Some entries are only a way of saying a person was here. He left her chair by the window where it stood. He still made the coffee strong the way she had liked it, most mornings, out of habit and out of something he did not try to name. People still come to the old station in Kettle Bend, off the county road, past the foundry and the IGA and the bait shop. They come to bring a thing in, or to fetch an old one back, and some only to sit by the stove a while with the quiet boy who keeps the books. No one who walks into that room leaves it feeling unaccounted for. Wyatt Renner had bought a building for $10 believing he was alone in the world. He had been wrong about that for 17 years, and had only just found out. A chain of custody is the law's plain name for a simple promise, that a thing was watched, that no hand ever let it go without writing down the next. He had not been lost. He had been filed and counted and kept warm in the cold by a hand that was never once allowed to hold him. And in the end, on a road he walked because a shelter would have put him out by 8, that hand reached him anyway.